There are two things you can do with a positive or negative. You can give it or you can take it. So if you give a positive, you have a response followed by a positive stimulus. And this one is called just reward or reinforcement. I'm sorry, it's called technically positive and it is the one we usually refer to as reward. And if I follow a response where I give a negative, this is like the child does something and I give them a whack with a ruler, right? We normally just call this punishment, but technically there are two kinds of punishment just as there are two kinds of reinforcement or reward. This is called presentation. Because you present them with a negative stimulus. Now you see there are two boxes not filled here. In this one, you have a response see, it's about a positive stimulus, right? These are the stimulus here. So you can give something or you can take something as an application. Or let's not call it an application since it happens after, let's say a consequence. A consequence can be something can be given or taken. You can give or take a positive stimulus or a negative stimulus. So in the case here, where a response removes a positive stimulus, right? If you have something you like and someone takes it from you, you don't consider that rewarding, you consider that punishing. So this particular one is called withdrawal punishment. And an example would be of that. Say, for instance, you have some kids and they like to argue over, or maybe not argue, maybe they like to yell at each other and fight during a TV program. And so you say to them, if you fight with each other while you're watching TV, the TV goes off. So the response is fighting, which removes the ongoing, remember it's an ongoing positive stimulus. So the children already have something to them going on, which is a positive stimulus. They emit a response, or they do a response, and that response results in the consequence of taking away the positive thing that they had, which is withdrawal punishment. The one other possibility is response a response removes a negative stimulus. Now, if you had an ongoing negative stimulus and it is removed, if something bad is happening to you and that thing is stopped, you feel good. So it is rewarding. Say, for instance, I'll give an example of an experimental situation. It's not a very nice one, but it is one that has been tried to see that these things work with animals. You put a rat in a cage and you electrify the grid on the bottom of the cage, and rats have sensitive feet, and the electric shock, which does not physically harm them, but is quite unpleasant to them. So they are there in an environment where they have an ongoing negative stimulus upon themselves. If they press a lever, the shock might stop for, say, 10 seconds. Then after 10 seconds, the shock starts again, and they'll press the lever again, and they learn very, very quickly to press that lever. Usually takes 2 or 3 trials. They learn to keep pressing that lever so that they don't get the shock. So that is called negative reinforcement. Called negative reinforcement because it deals with a negative stimulus. This one positive reinforcement because it deals with a positive stimulus. This one presentation punishment because you present a negative stimulus. This one withdrawal punishment because you take away a positive stimulus. But important to remember, it isn't the stimulus being negative or positive that determines whether the rate of the response will increase or in rate and magnitude. What determines is punishment, whether it is presentation or withdrawal, results in a decrease in the rate and magnitude of the response. Reinforcement, whether it is positive or negative, results in an increase in the rate and magnitude of the response. So some people get the idea you use a negative stimulus, it is going to result in a decrease in the rate of the response. This isn't true. It's the term reinforcement. You can forget about the name of the stimulus. All reinforcement increases responses, all punishment decreases responses. Any questions about these 4 ways? Basically, all of learning, everything I'm going to tell you further about learning, I don't know whether I'll get into one other thing. There is one variation on this. There's a variation on withdrawal punishment called avoidance learning, but it is so close to this that I consider it a form of withdrawal punishment. So basically, everything we will be talking about are these 4 forms. So first of all, you have to know the shaping process. You have to know one thing. Then you have to know there is reward and punishment, which is 2 things. And then you have to know reward and punishment can be applied in 4 different ways. Still not real complex. So does everybody understand this whole thing here? Now, you might well think that because if you want to increase a response, you use reward, that it seems logical if you want to decrease a response, you use punishment. I mean, that does sound reasonable, right? And punishment is very widely used in the world. Actually, punishment is probably more widely used in the world than reward. The reason being, it is something that I didn't actually mention here, but there is an ideal time between the response and the stimulus for a human being. To have its maximum effect, it should be applied within 1/2 second. To have maximum effect. That doesn't mean if it's a few seconds, it's not going to have an effect, but the ideal is 1/2 second. Occasionally you don't have an opportunity to do it even within a few seconds, but because human beings can recreate situations in their mind, if you're going to punish somebody for something later, you don't just get mad at them at the time and then say, okay, I'm going to punish you later, and then when you punish them later, just go ahead and punish them. You have to totally recreate the situation in their mind so that the punishment still comes essentially after a 1/2 second after the recreation of the response that was being punished. But so I shouldn't have erased that, but you can remember it. It was simple enough. The timing on this, you notice, to be most effective as a learning experience with both punishment and reward is how quickly the stimulus follows the response. If you reward somebody, you often don't get what you ask for or the rewarding stimulus. It often doesn't come very quickly. You might say to kids, it would be really nice if you treated your brothers and sisters more friendly. But in a 1/2 second, you're not going to get a change in that child's behavior. Although maybe later on they will think about it and they will change, but you won't notice it because there's been such a long time period between your response and the following stimulus. But if your child is doing something you don't like and you give them a whack with a wooden spoon, they stop right away. So you get immediate reinforcement. So this is why punishment is so widely used and reward is not so widely used. Punishment seems to work very, very effectively. And I admit it does. You can stop many negative behaviors through punishment. But there are a number of flaws with punishment that are not problems with reward. One of them is, while you can stop negative behavior with punishment, and you can even make some positive behavior occur with punishment, like for example, if your child is 10 years old and they won't pray, you are allowed, actually, we'll get into really what this means, because this needs a lot of interpretation, that you can beat your child for not praying at 10. So if you beat them, and their alternative is pray or get beaten, they usually pray. But the thing that you cannot do, while you may be able to get them to pray by punishment, you cannot get them to love praying in their heart by punishment. You can only get them to love praying in their heart by reward. So while you can get the behavior, you cannot get the intention. And you know that with any behavior that we do, if we do any good behavior, we have to intend that good behavior first before we get reward from Allah. Allah doesn't reward good behavior. Allah rewards good behavior following good intention. And so if you're using punishment, you are stealing the opportunity from your child to be reinforced or rewarded by Allah for their good behavior. That's not the only problem. Children who are punished tend to want to escape from actually how much time is left on this? 5 minutes. Okay, I was over time. I forgot when we started. Somebody indicated to me earlier that it was time for the break, and I thought it was a long time from the break, but we were actually late, but hopefully you can put up with this. I'll just say this last important thing about punishment. Children who are punished tend to try to escape from or retaliate against the punishing situation or person. So if there's a lot of punishment at school, children will try and not have to go to school. Or maybe they will come back later and vandalize the school. Right? They either want to retaliate against or escape from. Or if it is at home, maybe they will run away from home, or maybe they will retaliate with a lot of harsh words toward their parents. Also, we generally have bad feelings towards the situation or the person who punishes us. And of course, in Islam, we are supposed to have very good feelings toward our parents. And when you are punished, it is very hard to keep good feelings towards those who punish you, particularly if they punish you severely. And besides that, if you see punishment being used by your parents or your teachers and your teachers are a model to you as to what right human behavior is. So if you see people who are bigger and stronger than you, and they don't like what you are doing, and they want to make you do what they want to do, and they yell at you and hit you to get you to do it, you grow up thinking yelling and hitting people who are weaker than you to get them to do what you want is an appropriate human behavior, which it is not. So they learn that. So these are some of the drawbacks of punishment, and this is why I say it is impossible to punish a child without harming a child. And after we have our break, we will, I'll just tell you a little bit more about the harmful effects of punishment and how to overcome some of it. By the way, in there are some CDs and some books. Now I know you have seen these classes, right? But I don't know whether everyone can remember everything that was said. Also, you might have friends or relatives who might like to see these. So we're selling them at a price where we may make 2 ringgit or something, but we're not getting rich on this. I'm not trying to do it to make money, but I am trying to do it to increase the spread of this knowledge as much as possible. So for anyone who is interested, you might take a look at those, and every week, like next week we will have these 2 lectures, and the week after we'll have the previous 2 available. So anyway, now we have, what, 15-minute break, right? So if you'll come back maybe about, on my atomic corrected watch, approximately 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes after 11. Okay, we will go ahead and proceed now. It doesn't matter that everyone isn't exactly back. They can hear wherever they are, I'm sure. I said I was going to say a couple more things about the problems of punishment, but I had so many conversations in between, I forgot what those other couple of things were. But I just want to mention an interesting statement by, remember I said B.F. Skinner was the person who originated essentially all of these laws of learning. And he said a really wonderful, it was a very wonderful sentence in one of his books, and it is, "We are only beginning to understand the weakness of force and aggression as we are beginning to understand the power of love." Because basically in human history, love has not been the way that rightness has been encouraged, other than perhaps at the time of a few of the prophets who Allah revealed the knowledge to, that is the right way. And we have to remember that the reason that our prophet was even so very loved before he received revelation, because he was just basically the nicest man in the whole community. And later on, when we talk a little bit about child raising, I would say in much of the world, Muslims feel comfortable to be quite harsh in raising children. Harshness seems to be very prominent in our Muslim Ummah. Maybe, I don't know how much so in Malaysia, because there's a lot of permissiveness I notice goes on in Malaysia. But in some countries, and for a long time, there was a very lot of harshness used in the Muslim Ummah. Much of it on the basis of the idea that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had said to us that if your child reaches 10 years old and doesn't pray, you can beat them. So they generalized from this to a whole lot of other things. But we have to consider what the scholarly interpretation is on this statement, right? Because this is a really dangerous thing, to just take the words of a hadith of our Prophet and say, this is what it means. Bukhari himself, he used to often be asked, what does this mean? And he would say, I am not a scholar of interpretation of hadith. I am a scholar of the transmission of hadith. I don't answer those questions. They must be asked by scholars who are involved in interpretation. Because sometimes the words themselves, just picked out of one hadith, can be way out of context. So, yes, it is true that our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, said that if your child does not pray by the time they reach 10 years old, you can beat them. You don't have to beat them, but you can beat them. Islam is a religion of necessity. If I had a choice between beating my child and getting them to pray, and then hopefully, remember though, the prayer that the child does for fear of beating does not get reward from Allah. So it is not moving them toward paradise. But if it was a way, remember I said in the shaping process, you have to get the behavior going to get it rewarded. So if the behavior was not happening, and it took some punishment to get it happening, and then I could shift the punishment into reward, and then the child loved to pray later on in their life, and they achieve paradise rather than hellfire, I would certainly be willing to use them, some beating in the beginning. But assumed in this statement that when your child reaches 10 years old and doesn't pray, that you can beat them, there are some things that are assumed have already happened. They have assumed that since birth, that you have given them a right Islamic family environment and religious environment, so that these children from birth have seen you praying and enjoying your prayer. And then from the time they were, and if they wanted to join in before they were 7, they were made very welcome and rewarded highly for it. And then by the time they are 7 years old, you are specifically supposed to be encouraging them to pray. And encouraging them probably means being rewarding to them about prayer. So from 7 till 10, that's 3 years, which is roughly, just say it's only 1,000 days, and we pray 5 times a day, so this is 5,000 opportunities to have rewarded your child in that 3 years between 7 and 10 for prayer. And if you're rewarded for something 5,000 times in 3 years, it is very likely to be a behavior that has increased in rate and magnitude by that time. So if you just wait and do none of those things for your child, and wait until your child is 10 years old, and you haven't prayed in front of them, and you haven't showed them the joy of prayer, and you haven't rewarded them for the 3 years between 7 and 10 for their prayer, you have not earned the right to punish them. You see, this is assuming that you have done all the right things and the child is still so recalcitrant, or meaning will not go along with what is right. Then you could beat them. Not that you can just do nothing at all for them to get them to pray and wait till they're 10 years old and and say either pray or get beaten. So this is what the interpretation is, and we need to understand this, that Allah has expected us to give right Islamic family, to give a right Islamic family life to our children. As a matter of fact, if you want to raise good Islamic children, there's only two things you have to give them. A good Islamic home to grow up in. Even that's not so easy. Number two, though, much more difficult, a good Islamic society to go out into. You give them those two things, and I can guarantee you that you will raise good Islamic children, because Allah has guaranteed us that if you give them those two things, you will raise good Islamic children. And I go as far as to saying, I don't want anyone to feel bad when I say this, but if you are not giving your children or doing your best to give I mean, we can't, we have a lot of control over whether we give our children a good Islamic home, but we don't have all that much control yet over whether we give our children a good Islamic society or a good Islamic world to go out into. But anyone who is not doing whatever they can in the home to give their children a good Islamic environment, and who is not doing whatever they can, even if it is a small thing, to make the world a better place for their children, is actually guilty of child abuse by neglect. So, I mean, this obligation is a really, really powerful one. You know, the concept of Khalifa of Allah, where each generation is supposed to raise higher and higher than the one before, you're not going to get it by giving, you know, an Islamic home environment that is not very Islamic, and sending the children out into a world that is not Islamic at all and very heavily is influenced through shaitan and his secular materialism. I think it is shocking that we have done that. I mean, and I have to take responsibility too. I was at one point a very effective speaker for much of the wrong ways of life, and particularly tried to influence people toward those. Just to give an example, you know, we know a whole lot about, this is still about reward and punishment, because I want to convince you that reward really is the way to go and punishment is not the way to go. And we look at the Sunnah of our Prophet, and we know a whole lot about his life. I mean, I know intimate things about the life of beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that I would never know about my best friend. You know, I mean, some of it I feel almost shy to know that they are such intimate things. But we know virtually everything he ever did, and many of the actual words that he has said. And we do not have one instance where he ever physically harmed a child or even said a harsh word to a child. Not one instance. Now believe me, if he had had one instance of either one of those, we would have heard about it. And our Prophet also used to do some things that he would not do himself, but he wanted to do just one time to let people know that they were okay. So he didn't even do them one time to say that they were okay. So, you know, we have an ummah that virtually every person in the ummah will, when they put their shoes on, they'll put their right shoe on first. And we'll feel, you know, like this is really important. You know, I really follow the Sunnah. But when it comes to how we treat our children, do we treat them the way that our Prophet, according to the Sunnah of our Prophet? Not very many do. You see, so I can't make a judgment for sure. Only Allah knows for sure. But my hypothesis of probability would be that it means a lot more to the betterment of the ummah for children to be treated in a kind manner without harshness or physical blows than it does with shoe you put on first. Then we have the example of how Allah treats us. And one of the great scholars is Imam Nawawi. And our Prophet once said that anybody who knows 40 hadith, learns 40 hadith, is guaranteed paradise. Once again, we need a lot of interpretation with that. It's 40 hadith and a whole lot of other things, really, in interpretation. But of course, then many scholars have come up with lists of 40 hadith. But Imam Nawawi's 40 hadith is, of course, by far the most well-known 40 hadith that he suggests are important. And one of them has to do with the way Allah treats us. And it gives us an idea of what an appropriate ratio is for positive to negative in dealing with children. Everyone knows ratio like 2 to 1, right? For every 2 of these, there is 1 of those. Now, would anybody have any idea what the ratio might be that I would suggest is an appropriate ratio of positive interactions with children to negative? In other words, rewards to punishment. 10 to 1? $350 to 1. Sounds very difficult to do, right? You say, well, how in the world? Now, where would I get a number like that from? Okay? I get it from one of Nawawi's 40 hadith. Because Allah does not actually assign points, but just to make it easy to show where I get the number 350 to 1, I will talk about Allah's reward and punishment as points rather than in the way that He does it, which is not based on a digital system, but on probably some system we have no idea about. But what happens if you intend to do a positive thing? Talking in points, according to Nawawi's 40 hadith, what does Allah give you if you intend to do something good? 1 point, right? And if you go ahead and do that positive thing, what does Allah do? He multiplies it by what? Anyone remember the number? 10 to 700. Now, what happens if you intend to do a negative thing? No.
No, don't get it. 0.
0.
If you do it.
And if you go ahead and do the negative thing, 1. So 0 plus 1 is 1. 1, here the average between 1 and 700, which is available for having intended and done a positive thing. The average between 1 and 700 is 350. So this is where I get this ratio of 350 to 1. Now, I don't know for sure that this is what is meant by this, but it is interesting that it is a true numerical fact. Consistent with, because when we find out things about how Allah treats us, we are supposed to look at our Prophet as an example of how to do this. Our Prophet was as perfect as a human being has ever been. So our Prophet, never in his whole life, our Prophet's ratio was infinity to 0. Whatever number of interactions he had, which would have been many, many, many thousands in his life with children, to zero. Because he was an example of the perfect expression of how Allah would like this done. But Allah is practical with us and does not ask us to do more than is possible. So it appears He asks us to try and meet a ratio of only 350 to 1, instead of being perfect like our Prophet and being only positive to none in a whole lifetime. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all be like Prophet Muhammad? And I'm not really sure whether it is worthwhile going much into the I'll just tell you very, very briefly about schedules of reinforcement right now. Basically, the kind of reward I have been talking about is or the type of, let's actually just forget the negative, because I don't want to, they work the same, but I don't want us to think that I'm saying that we should use much negative. Basically, the only time in Islam we should use punishment is if we have no viable or workable positive alternative, and the behavior we have to get is a really necessary one. For example, if I had a 2-year-old child and I live near a busy street, and I say to my child, and these cars are whizzing by fast, right? And I say to my 2-year-old child, please don't go out in the street because the cars are coming fast and they could hit you, and you need to be really careful, so never go out in the street, and you could get hurt and I'll feel really sad, and you won't get to live a long and happy life, and so it is really a dumb thing to do. And I say that reasonably to them, and I find they still want to run out in the street. So I grab them by the arm when I catch them doing that, and I give them 3 medium hard slaps on the bottom. Now they are scared to go out into the street. I suffer the effects, the negative effects, that the child might be a bit angry at me and might want to escape and retaliate from the situation. All of these things are true, right? I have actually harmed the child, but the greater good of saving my child's life for this little bit of negativeness or harm that is done to them through the use of punishment, and if I have already tried a positive way and it didn't work, I would say go ahead and use it. But I don't know for sure everyone knows that in Islam there is a specific process for punishment. Before you use punishment and then when you use punishment. The first thing you do is you try and reason with a child and get them not to do it just by tell them in a nice way why it is wrong and why they shouldn't do it and suggest they don't do it again. The second stage isn't even to beat them, it's to withdraw your positive attention to them and say to them, because you are doing this wrong thing, of course I love you, but I'm not going to give you any affection or attention while you are doing these wrong things, because it will teach you these wrong things are right. Then you get to the third stage, which you are allowed to punish, physically punish. But there are rules on physical punishment. You don't hit the child in the face or the stomach, because the face and the stomach are places where being hit can cause easy permanent damage. The rest of the body being hit would very rarely cause permanent physical damage. You are only allowed to hit maximum of 3 times. And you are not allowed to hit hard enough to break the skin or leave a bruise. So it is a really merciful form of punishment. Additionally, and many people forget this, you are not allowed to punish your child while you are angry. Because if you are punishing your child while you're angry, you are much more likely to be satisfying your needs than to be teaching your child some positive thing. And of course, Allah is not going to be giving you much reward for hitting your child because you are angry. I think you are probably to get the opposite. So anyway, when I suggested, like on a shaping process, you start out, you give lots of reward. You give lots of reward here, and it's basically on a continuous reinforcement schedule, which means every response gets a reward. One response, one reward. One response, one reward. Works really well to get a behavior going, right? Several problems with it is, my chicken in the cage is hungry when it starts. But if it is in there too long, it's going to eat enough food, it's not going to be hungry anymore. And if it's on a continuous reinforcement schedule, that means it gets one piece of food for every response. So maybe you will get what's called satiation or fullness, and the thing no longer becomes rewarding. Additionally when you are learning something, the acquisition curve looks somewhat like this. Starts out slow and builds up fast. This is with reinforcement in effect, or reward. So you get a curve that looks like this. But say, for instance, you get up here and you cut off reward. For a behavior that is not naturally rewarding or has not become internally rewarding, like lever pressing for a rat, or if I quit reinforcing my chicken for doing that thing, and doing that turning the circle quit working, we get a drop off like this. This is called extinction. When there is no more reward after a behavior has been developed by reward, and then there is no more reward, the behavior tends to drop off through extinction. Now, if you are getting continuous reinforcement, and every single reward every single response gets a reward, it is really obvious. The first time you don't get a reward, something has changed. And it doesn't take very many instances to be real sure you're not getting rewarded anymore for your response, so you get a really quick extinction. So because of that, there are other ways to apply other than continuous reinforcement. There are, for example, what are called ratio schedules. I'll just give two examples here. Fixed ratio 5 and variable ratio 5. I think the term itself may give you some idea what it means. Fixed ratio 5 means instead of continuous reinforcement, where every response gets a reward, in fixed ratio 5, only every fifth response gets a reward. In variable ratio 5, on the average, every fifth response gets a reward. So you might get a reward after 1, or you might get a reward after 10, and the two would average to 5, or 6 and 4, and average 5. So it means on the fixed ratio, the animal, or the human being can come to know for every 5 they get 1. But by the way, on these fixed ratio schedules, you tend to get rates of behavior they're almost the same. I'll forget a little technical difference in the two. But you get very high rates of response. The reason you get very high rates of response, of course, is the more you do, the more you get. Right? The more responses, whether it's continuous reinforcement or fixed ratio 5, the more times you respond, the more rewards you get. To give an idea how powerful this fixed ratio or these ratio schedules are, they have with a rat in a cage who gets 1 little food pellet for each lever press. They have gone from teaching it to press the lever on a continuous reinforcement schedule up until the ratio was ratio 20,000. The rat had to press the lever 20,000 times for one food pellet. By the way, you don't jump from 5 to 20,000 successfully, right? Shaping process, you remember I said in the beginning you start with small steps. In the shaping process, I didn't actually mention this, it's very important. You never make a step so large that you're not likely to achieve it, or the shaping process will break down at that point. But if you do this slowly, you do 5, 10, 20, 50, 80, 150, 300. Well, actually, it would really work better on a variable ratio schedule, where the animal is never quite sure how many it takes, right? On a fixed ratio, you know it takes 5. On a variable ratio, you know it takes an average of 5. But theoretically, one could take 20 or 30 and then be managed by a whole lot of quick ones, or balanced by a whole lot of quick ones. So on a variable ratio, you're never quite sure. So and then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but after a very long period of time, you end up with a rat that is pressing the lever 20,000 times for 1 pellet. But the amount of energy it gets from 1 pellet is not nearly sufficient to cover the energy that is expended pushing the lever 20,000 times. So these schedules of reinforcement are so powerful, you can get enough work out of somebody, or an animal, or even a person. If you put them on the right schedule and had no morality, you can get them to work themselves to death, which of course has happened in the world with people at times before. But this is just showing how powerful these schedules are. So if you want fast rates of response, if you want a whole lot of work out of somebody, you want it done quickly, you go to a fixed ratio or variable ratio schedules. The other kind of schedules are called interval schedules, which always seem to be harder for people to understand. And we could have a fixed interval, 5-minute, or a variable. I mean, it can be anything. I'm just picking 5-minute. And so, if you have a fixed interval 5-minute schedule, what the this will be the established response rate for fixed ratio and variable ratio, both of them very high rates of responding, continuous. Fixed interval schedules tend to look like this. The reason being, what this fixed interval, some people think that fixed interval 5 minutes means that there is a reward every 5 minutes. That is not true. It means that there cannot be a reward for the first 5 minutes. As soon as 5 minutes has passed, the first time a response occurs, it can be rewarded. A response that occurs before the 5-minute period cannot be rewarded. You understand that what that interval means? For the first 5 minutes, you can respond, but you don't get reward. You only get reward for the first response after 5 minutes has passed. So that's why you get response like this, because after the animal or the person learns the schedule, that they see, well, in the beginning, here, there's no chance at all of reward. But I don't want to miss it, so when I think the period is getting close to the end, I start upping my rate of the response because I want to get it as quickly as possible. You know, if it's a fixed interval 5 minute, I don't want to wait a half hour because I could have got 6 rewards in that half hour if I had been responding at the end of each 5 minutes. So on a fixed interval schedule, you start out really slow in whatever the interval is, and toward the end of the interval, you speed up. And you might notice this is very similar to exam behavior, where when you go to school, right, you get exams at certain periods of time. And many people, they know that the opportunity to be rewarded is here and here, but in this period here, there is no opportunity for reward. So nobody studies here, but they start studying just before the exam or cramming. And so setting up exams on a fixed interval schedule, as we do, is probably not a very efficient way to set up the learning situation. Because we set it up so we'll have long periods of time with no responding, and then a lot of responding at the last minute. If you have a variable interval schedule, they don't know how long it takes. But what they do know is there's no sense working really hard, because it's not a matter anymore now of the more you do, the more you get. It's a matter of don't miss the interval. So you get a response rate that looks somewhat like this, a low and steady response rate. Since you never know, it could be on a fixed ratio 5 minutes. You could get a reward after 30 seconds or after 10 minutes. So what you do is just every once in a while you make a response so you don't miss out if the period had gone. But you don't work really hard, because the chance at any given time is not really great you're going to get a reward. Where with a ratio schedule, it is fixed. The relationship between the rewards and the responses and the rewards. But here, it is fixed by the amount of time that must occur before a response can be rewarded. So you get a rate like this. And for a class that uses, what are they called, pop quizzes? So, you know, if you have two midterms and a final, they are like fixed intervals because the people know exactly when they will be. But here we have pop quizzes. So has anyone ever taken a class where when you go into class, the professor says, well, come to class every day prepared because I give pop quizzes? But you are never really sure whether he will or not. And so you often take the chance that he won't. And so what you do is you study at a slow but steady rate, hoping that the days when he does a pop quiz will be one where you have studied. So this also is not a very effective way. But also it's a way that is not appreciated at all. You would think if you want people to learn as much as possible, you would have them on a ratio schedule. The more work they do, the more reward they get. And there is a system of education that was proposed back in the 1960s by a psychologist named Fred Keller called the personalized system of instruction. And basically what he did is and I actually used this once at a university. We had a introductory psychology textbook, and there's like 500 kids in the class. And we guarantee everyone in the class a 5-credit A. It's a 5-credit class, right? 5 days a week class. So we guarantee everyone who finishes a 5-credit A. And we set it up so the book is about 400 pages long, and so we break it up into 20-page segments. And these 20-page segments it's not so hard to learn just 20 pages out of a book. So to get the right to pass on to learn the second 20 pages, you have to pass an exam on the first 20 pages. And if you fail the exam on the first 20 pages, you can come back and take a different exam on the first 20 pages. And if you fail that one, you can come back again. So we made 3 exams for each 20 pages, different exams for each 20 pages. And it's very unlikely somebody's going to go away 3 times and study and come back to pass an exam and not pass it in 1 or 3 times. We never had anyone do that. So you can move at whatever rate you want to move. If you want to get your 5-credit A out of the way early in the year, or most of the work for it early in the year, and then not have anything left to do, and put your time in other classes, you're able to do that. They did also have a midterm and a final, which worked on the same basis, that you take a midterm, you don't do very well, you then come back, go study, come back, take it again. Don't do very well, come back, take it, and pass it at a very high rate. Basically, all of the 20-page sections, you have to pass the exam at 100%. So you have to know the 20 pages at 100%. On the midterms, I think it was 90-something%. So you had to know it really at an A level. And the same thing with the final. So here we have a class with aside from the few people who dropped it, almost 500 people come into a 5-credit psychology class and all get an A. And all know the material at essentially 100% and get to do it at their own rate and get it out of the way quickly and then spend their time doing other things. Sounds like a really good way to go, right? So we did a survey at the end saying, how many of you would like to take another class like this? And less than 10% of the people would like to take a class like that. And when asked the reason why, too much work. Because the alternative, you see, is to get your grades for very little work. You're probably not going to learn it, at least not as many people are going to learn it as well, but everybody gets to do a small amount of work, rather than everybody do a whole lot of work and get an A. Everybody can do a small amount of work, and some people fail and some people get an A, which seems like quite an inefficient way to set up an education system. So by knowing this, you then also know how to regulate how behavior will occur. Okay, that's just a very brief thing on schedules of reinforcement. Now we come just to a little bit of actual application, because application can be very, very complex with human beings. Say, for instance, you have a child who has learned that, and notice I say has learned, this is not a thing the child comes into the world automatically with. They have learned that if they go shopping with you and there is something they want and you don't want to give it to them, if they throw a tantrum in the store, you will give them that thing that they want. You know, like you're walking through Carrefour and they pick up a little toy, and Carrefour is like a really busy store, and they say, "Mommy, can I have this?" And she says, "No." She says, "I want it." She says, "No, I want it." And then eventually could get to the extent of falling to the ground and kicking their legs and screaming, "I hate you," and "You're a bad mommy," and all sorts of things, right? You have like 200 people gather around to watch. Now, I would say this is an ongoing it would be fair to say, right, the parent is caught in an ongoing unpleasant situation. So if the parent's response during this ongoing unpleasant response is and what kind of reinforcement is this? Remember there's two kinds of reinforcement? Okay. Remember what negative reinforcement was? A response that removes an ongoing aversive or negative stimulus. So here, the ongoing negative stimulus is the child having the tantrum and hundreds of people watching you deal unsuccessfully with it. Your response is you give in. It stops the response. It stops the ongoing tantrum. And everything is fine, right? But from the child's point of view, their response is tantrum followed by S plus. So what happens with reinforcement? What is the result of reinforcement? Whether it is positive or negative? Increase in rate and magnitude in the future. So here we have a situation where this goes on with a parent, and it's a situation of negative reinforcement, and it will result in an increase in rate and magnitude in the future of giving in to tantrums. The child is in a situation where their response of having a tantrum is followed by a positive stimulus, so they are positively rewarded for their response, which we will tend to have increase in rate and magnitude in the future. So we have the parent and the children magnifying or amplifying the wrong behaviors of each other. And such patterns do occur. Would you like to know what I would do in a situation like this? Well, in the first place, I would never get in a situation like this. Because I would have raised my children in the beginning, because everything is a shaping process, and this tantruming in the store was not a natural thing that they were born with. And if it was never written on their consciousness, the various steps in the shaping process to get there, they wouldn't do it. Say, for instance, I was in a situation and it did happen, and assuming, because normally older children don't do this, but I am a lot bigger and stronger than the child, I will just pick the child up as soon as this starts and say to them, if you're going to have a tantrum in the store, I will not allow you to be in the store with me. I will take you out to the car and I will take you home. And so I take away their opportunity to be rewarded for the tantrum before it gets to that point. If it had already gotten to the point where there was a big crowd, I might even say as a learning experience to the crowd, pick the child up and say, my child has learned some very bad behaviors. I'm not going to give in because that would just reward that behavior. Sorry you had to see this, but I'm just going to take my child and take them away from the opportunity to get something for having a tantrum, because I would never give in to a tantrum. So then walk out of the store. Because it is very, very important not to reward negative behavior. And instances, I mean, you know, people who really love their kids will teach them some terrible things. I was at a BIM meeting once, and there was a old grandfather, my age or older, who had his little grandson there, about 4 years old. And this man really, really loved his grandson a lot, you could tell. He was not interested in the talk that was going on. He was interested in his grandson. So as his grandson is walking around, this man is just sitting there and he's going. You know, he is just beaming. He just thinks his little grandson is so wonderful. And then a half-grown cat walks by, and his grandson just, with his foot, just gives it a little nudge with a foot. Just enough to kind of push its side in a little bit, not even to knock it over or anything. But children like to get feedback as to what those who care about them think about their behavior. So the little boy does this, looks over at his grandfather, and his grandfather goes, oh no. Because reward is not only words, right? Somebody nodding and smiling who likes you a lot is very rewarding. So a few minutes later, the cat walks by again, and the little boy gives the cat a kick. Not quite hard enough to knock it all the way over, but not much hard enough to make it move sideways. Looks at his grandfather goes. And I think, oh, wow, this is really terrible. Now, cats, being apparently only slightly smarter than chickens, walks by the third time, which I thought was a very bad idea. And this time the boy draws his foot back and he's going to kick the cat as hard as he can, you see, because he's being rewarded. His response rate is going to be increasing in rate and magnitude. So he tries to give the cat a really hard kick. But because 4-year-old boys are actually often not very coordinated, he misses the cat and falls over. And his grandfather jumps up and runs over and, oh, you okay? And he, you know, pays all this kind of attention to him. So his grandfather, who really loves this boy, right, probably would be willing to die rather than let the boy be hurt, is actually teaching him a really terrible behavior, that it is okay to mistreat animals, which is something that's totally opposed to Islam. But he doesn't know it because he doesn't know about the laws of learning.